So this wave here, the red wave on top, as it reaches where the pine cones kiss noses in the center, the one wave is going one way, and it has to meet the other pine cone going in the opposite direction, 180 degrees out of phase. You might call that getting screwed. But it actually means the way two screws cross. And the way they would meet perfectly is that, and when that happens, it would create a longitudinal wave. And longitudinal waves would enable you to make a flame with your mind. Now, it turns out that there's very few scientists in the world who know how to make longitudinal waves, sadly. It's sad. But compare that image. Compare the image we were just looking at about pine cones kissing noses. Compare that to what's called four-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics. It's just, if you arrange for lasers to meet like that, it's called a phase conjugate mirror. You know when Alice was in the looking glass, and then she noticed that the milk was not nourishing, because when you're in a mirror, supposing you're living inside a mirror, inside a mirror, the helix is going to go the wrong way, isn't it? Well, it turns out that all living proteins have a helix that's one way only. It's called enantiomorphism. And if the helix goes the wrong way, then your body cannot absorb it. NutraSweet, I think, is an example of a helix that went the wrong way, and so your body doesn't absorb it. Well, when Alice was in the looking glass, she says, this milk is not nourishing. Guess what? She was in a phase conjugate mirror. She was in the mirror, and the helix was going the wrong way, up the down staircase. And when the helix goes the wrong way, biology, it cannot absorb that energy. And in physics, this is called a phase conjugate mirror. And when light bounces off a phase conjugate mirror, does anybody know? I will give you a clue. When my friend Bob Zawada, he taught phase conjugate optics. And when you called him on the telephone, his answering machine says, please leave a message, and I will phase conjugate back to you in the near past. Because in phase conjugate optics, they call it time reversal. They call it time reversal when they teach it in a physics class. What they mean is that the waves return to a previous state of greater order. I repeat, the wave returns to a previous state of greater order. Now, why would that be important to you? Well, there's another friend of ours, both Bill and I work with him. His name is Guy Obolensky. Guy Obolensky in Sloatsburg, New York. And he is perhaps one of the world's living experts on Tesla. Maybe also Bill. And sure enough, Guy Obolensky built a device to phase conjugate electric fields, and you can pay him and go over there and get inside in order to phase conjugate back to the near past. I mean, in order to get younger. Oh yeah, you can buy it. It's a fountain of youth. It's real. It's possible. Yes. You can reverse aging, absolutely. It's been done in physics a long time. In physics, the way they proved it, if a bar of steel gets rusty, you can de-rust the steel by taking it back to the past. Ain't it cool? Now, there's one little complication here. As you're making your plans to get younger, I need to tell you there's a caveat, there's a condition. There's always conditions. It couldn't have been that, right? The condition is that you can only go back to a past where it is a state of greater order. You cannot return to disorder. That's going to be my new bumper sticker, I think. I'll put that right here. You cannot return to disorder. You know, a messy house can't return to disorder. No. I mean, I want to go backwards in time. You can't return to disorder. I want to return to my youth. Well, if your body was in a disordered state. Now, why can you only go do time travel to the past if you are returning to a state of greater order? I will tell you that's physics for sure. And I will tell you it has everything to do with the flame in the mind. You know what the real fountain of youth is? Guess what it is? It's a flame in the mind. Yeah. Now, we could do the conversation about the biomechanics of Kundalini. Maybe we'll save that one for the moment. The conversation I want to do at the moment about this flame in the mind is regarding the science of alchemy. Now, you all know that we explained that the term alchemy means access to a black hole, which means non-destructive collapse. So when the mercury thin film is on the philosopher's stone and it's turning to gold, what's happening to the nucleus of mercury to change it to gold? It's plasma fusion. It's a charge collapse. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's possible to predict very accurately the frequencies and temperatures at which you can make all of these atoms transmute into their mirror, into their next element in the atomic table. The real physics of alchemy is teachable once you understand the flame in the mind. Now, my purpose here today is not to claim to do new physics, although we can. We clearly can do new physics. We have a dozen, within our own grasp, at least a dozen technologies, and Bill is going to show you pictures today where we understand the electrical engineering of a dozen or more different zero-point energy sources. Actually, from an electrical engineering standpoint, doing the hardware to make the zero-point energy is the easy part. Really, it's the easy part. You know what the hard part is? The hard part is the education so that we can use this in a self-empowered way. Because only if we understand the principle behind it can we use it without it destroying us. So our job is to understand plasma fusion in a way that teaches us the principle. Otherwise, we will be disempowered. Practical example. The famous Joe cell, and to some extent the Brown's gas. We now know that the hydrogen atom for the hydrolysis, which is the center of the Joe cell and Brown's gas, I wrote the equation to prove that the radius of hydrogen equals Planck length times exact multiples of golden ratio. That was not known until I wrote the new equation. goldenmean.info/golden proof. Now, that means that the hydrogen atom arrangement of electron shells is exactly this. This is literally a model of the radii, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio. This is how hydrogen works. This is how the sun's heart works. This is the geometry of carbon fusion. Oh, and did you know that the center bond of every rung on the ladder of DNA is hydrogen? So what's going down the zipper of your DNA when you unzip and zip up your DNA, the center? Hydrogen. Guess what the catalyst for the carbon powder fusion is? Hydrogen. Guess what the geometry of hydrogen is? Pure, implosive, three-dimensional fractal fusion geometry. So, the fusion in the center of the sun is similar to the fusion in the center of your DNA. Now, there's another story that goes with this. And this story is called Fusion in the Blood. And for this also I want to acknowledge my friend Bill Donovan, who is speaking next. We know that inside your body, atoms are being transmuted. It has been proven. The famous French chemist, biologist, Louis Kevron, showed the African miners were synthesizing potassium or phosphorus, and they showed that chickens can manufacture calcium from other atoms. There's many, many well-documented examples that atomic transmutation happens inside your body. Cold fusion inside your body. Well known. Now, Bill says that one of the atoms which is transmuted in your body is magnesium. I think, was it magnesium, Bill? Yeah. And this is one of my excuses for eating dark chocolate, actually. Because dark chocolate is rich in magnesium. And so I'm feeding the fusion in my blood. There's my excuse. And everyone needs some addiction. You know, I was doing a lecture about addiction one day, and being very critical of people who were addicted to drugs, etc. And one very young person in the audience said, "No, you're addicted to food." I said, "Ooh, I guess I am addicted." So, the point is that fusion does happen in the blood. Now, we know a lot about how the fusion is happening in the blood. First, we're going to look at the geometry of DNA to understand fusion in the blood. Most of you remember from earlier lectures that I have done the way DNA is measurably affected by human bliss. Remember, here we have the famous story, your heart harmonics. This is the electric field that causes your heart to fire. And this is the fractal harmonic inclusive heart, the frequencies in your heart. And when the frequencies are inclusive, phase coherent, there's more donuts, more implosion in the heart, which is called a fractal heart, is a healthy heart. So that means the short wave is embedded inside the long wave in your heart. It's called perfect nesting or perfect embedding. And this is the way Feng Shui is taught, and this is the way harmonics is taught, or a fractal heart, or a healthy heart. It's simply this, that when the long wave, well, fits on the short wave, or you could say, when the short wave fits perfectly inside the long wave, it's called embedding or nesting. I think you would call it sitting comfortably in the mind of God. Perfect nesting. So what happens in your DNA is this is measurable now. It's been measured that when your heart harmonics nest coherently, it causes the short wave to embed recursively in the long wave and actually increases the amount of braiding in your DNA. Now, we've been teaching this story for 20 years. We know the DNA braids recursively. The thread is braided into string. The string is braided into rope. The rope is braided into very thick, fat rope. We say the plot is thickening. Your DNA gets thicker. Well, eventually, this braiding in your DNA, like a Celtic knot, appears to pelastrate, which means to turn inside out. I would turn myself inside out for you, darling, DNA said. And this turning inside out means the DNA becomes a big donut. There's a picture of DNA in a torus, in a donut. So in the center of that, DNA becomes toroidal. This is actually a photomicrograph right here of DNA in a torus, in a donut, just like this. Now, there's one more really fun part of the story of Dr. George Edgley that I wanted to tell you about. The other half of his website is about his hobby, which is studying ball lightning. Are any of you familiar with ball lightning? Have you heard of ball lightning? Sometimes lightning comes in a house, and it turns from a bolt of lightning when the lightning beams cross. The lightning turns into a ball, like this. Now, the thing that's really interesting when ball lightning forms is that there are documented stories that people can talk to ball lightning. Documented stories. In other words, here's the ball lightning comes in the room, somebody's having telepathy with their ball lightning, and they say, if you can hear me, go over there. The ball lightning is over there. If you can, right? It's well known that if you're the least bit telepathic or psychic, you can talk to ball lightning. Anybody know why? Why is it that ball lightning is telepathic? Ball lightning is like a photon. It's a donut. And in the center of the donut, there's a convergence in place. Harmonic convergence. At the center of the donut, where the plasma converges, it makes a kind of plasma radio. Telepathy. Remember we were talking about Dr. Korotkov from Russia? He was following the Kogi to where they go to make phone calls to their ancestors, the shaman of this South American sacred tribe. And where they go to telephone their ancestors, he measured the electricity of the air, the charge, and he called it fractal air. And what he meant was, electrically, the place where you can telephone your ancestors is a place where charge distribution is perfect. Now, the way we measure that, we have three ways to measure that. But basically, in biological living architecture, you need to be able to measure whether the air is fractal. So, here it is. If you put a condenser under a tree, the condenser, the capacitor, in a sacred space under a sacred tree here, the electric field is very able to unpack. Charge distribution is invited. You can do a lot of physics around this, as Dr. Korotkov has, and you can show that you can consistently measure whether the space is sacred simply by whether the air, the air in the space is charged radiant. Whereas if you take the same device and put it inside a metal building, the electric field is trapped here. It cannot unpack. So this is the place electrically measured where it is possible to lucid dream. Circle of trees, stone circle, sacred architecture. It is also possible there to have successful birth and death. I repeat, it is also possible there to have successful birth and death for the exact electrical reason you call that sacred space. Whereas over here on this side, where the charged radiance is trapped, the electric field cannot get out. Waves of capacitive charge are not able to unpack. This space is the opposite of sacred. Here, you cannot phone your ancestors. This was measured in a metal building. Do not send your children to steel and aluminum buildings for school. It is not okay for this electric reason. Now, to understand this principle a little bit better, why is birth and death and lucid dreaming and phone calls to ancestors, why is this only possible in sacred space? And at our website, goldenmean.info/architecture, we show 3 different ways to measure sacred space. Sacred space is very teachable in electrical engineering. We use a gold